He hadn't spoken in months. Then, a movie star handed him something, and the boy whispered a single word that shattered the silence. It wasn't just a gift. It was a moment that rewrote everything his family thought they knew. What did Keanu Reeves say that made this impossible breakthrough happen? Stay to find out. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Liam Grayson didn't speak, at least not with words. At 15, he had lived most of his life surrounded by language he couldn't use. Diagnosed with nonverbal autism at age 3, Liam grew up in a quiet world that often moved too fast, too loud, and too full of expectations he didn't understand. But there were patterns he followed, rhythms he trusted, and people he watched, especially one man in particular. It started with a movie night when Liam was 11. His mom, Andrea, had fallen asleep on the couch while flipping through channels. Liam was supposed to be in bed, but instead, he stood silently behind the couch, watching a man move through a dark city, focused and unhurried. That man was John Wick. It wasn't the action scenes that held Liam's attention. It was the stillness between them, the way John paused before walking into a room, the way he centered himself, the way he carried grief like a quiet shadow, but never let it stop him. From that moment on, Liam was captivated. He watched the John Wick films repeatedly, not for the gunplay or the choreography, but for the way Keanu moved. Calm, composed, present. Liam would rewind the same 10 seconds over and over, watching the way Keanu walked into a hallway, the way he looked forward without blinking, the way his hands stayed at his sides, steady and firm. Andrea noticed but didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Liam had never mimicked anything before. Not a cartoon, not a friend, not even the therapists who encouraged him to echo basic movements. But now, something was different. One evening, after finishing the second film, Liam stood up in the middle of their small living room and began to walk. Not just pacing or fidgeting. This was intentional, measured. Andrea, seated at the kitchen counter with a mug of tea, turned her head and froze. Liam's shoulders were pulled slightly back, his gaze was forward. His hands hung calmly by his sides. Step after step, he was imitating the walk of a man who never broke under pressure. Andrea's eyes filled with tears. She didn't speak. She didn't want to interrupt whatever had just happened. Instead, she watched as her son completed a small loop around the sofa, paused at the hallway entrance, and looked back, not at her, but at the television screen that had just gone dark. That night, she wrote a short entry in her notebook. March 3rd, Liam walked like Wick. It was the first time I saw him be someone. Andrea started documenting Liam's moments more closely after that. At first, it was just brief notes on her phone. Watched the museum scene again. Stood like Wick near the door. Paused before turning. But over time, the notes grew longer. They weren't about movies. They were about Liam finding a new language, one of movement, posture, and presence. There were days when Liam wouldn't eat until he'd watched at least 5 minutes of a John Wick film. Other days when Andrea would find him standing in the backyard, arms relaxed, eyes closed, breathing as if preparing for something important. It wasn't play acting. It was more like preparation, a way of coping, a way of becoming. His therapists were intrigued. One of them, a speech-language pathologist named Dr. Kendall, asked Andrea to bring clips of Liam's favorite scenes. They played them side by side with footage of Liam walking. "He's matching energy, not just movement," Dr. Kendall said one afternoon. "This is emotional mirroring. He's not pretending to be John Wick. He's feeling what John Wick feels." Andrea wept quietly in her car after that session, not out of grief, but out of a strange, quiet joy. Her son wasn't just absorbing the world, he was finally reflecting something back. One weekend, Andrea took Liam to a local comic book shop that was holding a Matrix anniversary event. There were posters, pins, and a life-size cutout of Keanu Reeves in sunglasses and a black coat. Liam stopped in front of it and didn't move. Andrea thought he might be overwhelmed, but then he did something unexpected. He reached out and touched the figure's heart. Just once. Just a light press of his fingers to the chest. Then he walked away. No words, no noise. But everything in Andrea's body knew what it meant. That night, she sat in bed scrolling through old interviews with Keanu Reeves. She stumbled upon a quote where he'd said, "Sometimes the most human thing you can do is just be present." It echoed everything Liam was doing without saying a word. Andrea created a private blog to record these moments. She called it Liam's Silence, not as a statement of what was missing, but of what was sacred. The blog was quiet, tucked away, mostly for herself and a few close friends. But one entry in particular stood out. She titled it, "John Wick Taught My Son to Speak." And though she didn't mean verbal speech, her words carried weight. She wrote, "My son has never spoken a sentence, but he is speaking through movement, grace, and focus. And the man who showed him how, probably, doesn't even know." Andrea didn't post the entry to go viral. She didn't tag anyone. She didn't even use Keanu's name in the headline. But something in the quiet power of her story began to ripple. A friend asked if she could share it, then another. Soon, Andrea was receiving messages from parents around the country who also had children with autism and who also found unexpected hope in film, in structure, in silent strength. One message read, "My daughter taps her fingers every time she sees Keanu take a step. I never knew anyone else noticed." Another simply said, "Thank you for making me feel less alone." Andrea was overwhelmed but grateful. She printed out the messages and slipped them into a folder marked Liam's World. One night, as she was organizing the blog, she looked up and saw Liam standing in the doorway, holding his favorite DVD case, John Wick, Chapter 2. He walked to her, placed it on the desk, then placed his hand on her wrist. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. His eyes met hers, and for the briefest moment, Andrea felt like they were standing in the same scene, the same still frame of understanding. She whispered, "You love him, don't you?" Liam nodded, a slow, deliberate nod. She nodded back, "Me too." That night, she clicked public on her blog for the first time. It wasn't for fame. It wasn't for attention. It was a record, a soft declaration that something beautiful was happening in the silence. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there might understand. 2 days later, she received an email. It was short, simple. Subject, Keanu Reeves would like to send something to Liam. Andrea stared at the screen, unsure if it was real. There was no request for a video, no logos, no PR pitch. Just a warm note from someone named Daniel, who explained that he worked with Keanu personally. He had read her story, and it had moved them both. Andrea reread the message 4 times before responding. She didn't tell Liam, not yet, because this wasn't about a surprise. It was about preparing for something sacred. That night, Liam watched the final 10 minutes of John Wick again, but this time, Andrea noticed he was smiling. Not a big grin, not a giggle, just a faint curl of the lips. It was as if something had shifted, as if somehow he already knew. Andrea sat on the edge of her couch, phone in hand, fingers hovering above the keyboard. The living room was dimly lit, and the only sound was the faint hum of the dishwasher and the gentle tapping of Liam's fingers on the floor. He was pacing again, his favorite motion when thoughts ran too fast or too deep. But now, there was something different about the way he moved. His steps weren't aimless, they were measured, intentional. His shoulders slightly squared, a rhythm to his stride. He was walking like John Wick again. She'd seen it 3 times now, enough to know it wasn't random. There was purpose behind it, a kind of tribute. Andrea opened the Facebook app and clicked into the Autism Parents of Oregon support group. Her hands trembled slightly, not because she was nervous about sharing, but because she finally had something to say that felt like a light instead of a lament. She titled the post, "How John Wick Taught My Son to Speak Without Words." Then she wrote, "My son Liam is 15. He doesn't speak, not with words anyway, but he understands so much more than most people give him credit for. He has autism, the kind that makes sounds too sharp, lights too bright, and crowds too loud. But when he watches John Wick, something inside him settles. It's not about the action, it's not about the guns. It's the stillness, the grace, the silence that says more than 1,000 words. He watches Keanu walk, and it's like he's learning how to exist in the world again. And tonight, he didn't just watch. He stood up, and for the first time ever, he copied the walk. I know that sounds small, but for us, it's everything. It wasn't random stimming, it wasn't mimicry. It was deliberate. It was him trying to be someone he sees as strong. I caught it on video, just a few seconds, but in that clip, he mouths something. I don't know what it is for sure. Maybe it's a line, maybe it's just air, but it came with meaning. And for a mother who spent 15 years listening to silence, that's a sound I'll never forget. We're not asking for charity, we don't need a GoFundMe. We just wanted someone out there, maybe even Keanu himself, to know that his quiet strength reached a kid who barely exists in the noise of this world. Thank you for making characters that listen more than they speak. My son heard that, and tonight, he answered. She attached the video, then she hit post. The post didn't explode overnight like viral clips usually do. It simmered. The first dozen likes came from other moms in the group. Familiar names Andrea had seen post about therapies, meltdowns, and sleepless nights. One woman commented, "I don't even know Liam, but I feel like I just watched a miracle." Another added, "I showed this to my husband, he cried." By the next morning, the view count had ticked past 2,000. Andrea's inbox was full. Messages from strangers, from parents, from people who simply wrote, "Thank you for sharing him." One message stood out. A man named Harris, who introduced himself as a therapist in Colorado, wrote, "I work with teens who've lost their voices in different ways. That walk, your son's walk, it's not just mimicry, it's embodiment. That's something sacred." Andrea didn't know what to say. She didn't even know what she was expecting. Maybe just a few kind words, maybe a comment or two from friends. But now it was being shared beyond the group. Screenshots landed on Twitter. Someone reposted it to Reddit. A stranger on Instagram with 100,000 followers called it the purest thing I've seen this year. That afternoon, a new notification pinged. @Matrix_fan87 tagged @Keanu Reeves official in a post. Andrea clicked in. It was the video again, captioned, "If anyone deserves to see this, it's Keanu himself." She felt a nervous flutter in her chest, not fear, just disbelief. She didn't think it would go anywhere. Keanu Reeves was a movie star, a legend. He probably got tagged in hundreds of things a day, maybe even thousands. Still, a strange hope started growing inside her, soft and quiet. That night, she checked the post again before bed. 43,000 views, 900 comments, 0 shares. Andrea sat back on her pillow and stared at the ceiling. Something had shifted, not just in her timeline, but in her heart. It wasn't about going viral. It wasn't about fame. It was about Liam being seen. That evening, as she closed her phone, she heard the familiar creak of the floorboards. Liam was pacing again, but this time he stopped by her bedroom door. Stood there, still, like he was waiting. She looked up and smiled. "You want me to come watch with you?" He didn't respond, but he turned and began to walk down the hall, deliberate, slow, centered. The John Wick walk. She followed. He pressed play. It was the rooftop scene. Keanu walking toward the edge, wind in his coat, not speaking, just moving forward. Liam sat, legs crossed, completely still. Andrea watched him, watched how much he was feeling without saying anything. And in that moment she realized he wasn't walking towards something. He was walking with someone. The next morning, Andrea woke up to her phone vibrating, dozens of notifications. Someone had reshared the post to a page called Autism Strong, another on Humans of Film. Then her cousin messaged, "Have you seen what's happening? It's everywhere." Andrea rubbed her eyes and opened the video again. It had climbed past 80,000 views, hundreds of new comments, many from people she'd never met, all echoing the same sentiment. "This story gives me hope. I needed this today." My son watches John Wick for the same reason. But there was one comment right near the top that froze her in place. "We forwarded this to Keanu's team, fingers crossed." It was followed by a heart emoji and a small prayer symbol. Andrea didn't know if it was real or just kindness, but either way it meant something to see Liam's name next to those words. "We forwarded this to Keanu's team." That afternoon she walked into the living room to find Liam standing at the window, arms crossed, eyes wide. He wasn't pacing, he wasn't flapping his hands like he often did when overstimulated. He was just watching. Outside, the mail truck had pulled up. Andrea smiled. "Not today, buddy, but maybe someday." Then something unexpected happened. Liam turned, looked at her, and whispered, not clearly, not loudly, but with effort, "Wick." Andrea froze. It was the first time he had spoken in almost 5 months. She felt her knees weaken. Her eyes welled up. It wasn't a sentence, it wasn't even a full word, but it was his voice. Intentional. Chosen. She knelt down slowly beside him. "You like him, huh?" Liam didn't answer, but he kept watching the window, as if waiting for something. Or someone. Andrea pulled out her phone with trembling hands, opened Facebook, and wrote another update. Simple. No hashtags, no embellishment, just truth. "Today, my son said one word, Wick, and it meant the world." She didn't expect that second post to go as far, but within hours it had twice as many shares as the first. And that's when the messages shifted. From fellow parents, from therapists, from teachers. One wrote, "I've never seen a child resonate so deeply with something that wasn't made for them, but was still made for them." Another said, "Keanu's characters don't talk much, they just feel." Maybe that's what Liam connected with, a man who doesn't need to speak to be understood. By nightfall, someone had posted a tweet that gained traction fast. "This isn't just a fan story, it's a language of stillness shared across a screen." And then under it, a simple call for others to engage. Have you ever seen someone connect to a movie in a way that changed them? Tell us below. That prompt caught on, and the story was just beginning. It was a gray morning in Portland, with light rain tapping gently on the kitchen window. Andrea stood at the counter, stirring her coffee, still half asleep. The mailbox hadn't been a source of anything good for months, mostly bills, medical forms, and the occasional catalog. But that day, a small cream-colored envelope stood out among the clutter. No return address, just her name, handwritten. She paused, wiping her hands on a towel, and opened it cautiously. Inside was a single folded note and something thicker, like a photograph. Her eyes skimmed the handwriting first. It was slightly tilted, the ink bold but smooth, each letter formed with care. "Dear Liam, thank you for walking with me. It means more than I can say. Keanu." She didn't move for a moment. The note was brief, but something about it felt enormous. She turned over the enclosed photo. It was a still from John Wick 3, the iconic rain-drenched scene where Keanu walks down the alley, bloodied but unbroken. In the corner, written in the same hand, "Stay strong." Andrea blinked quickly, trying not to cry. She placed the note and the photo on the table and called softly to her son. "Liam, honey, come see this." Liam shuffled in, wearing his fleece hoodie and socks with mismatched colors. He tilted his head at the envelope and looked at her questioningly. She didn't explain right away. She just pointed at the note and began reading it slowly, her voice thick with emotion. When she finished, Liam didn't say anything. He simply walked over, placed his hand over the paper, and closed his eyes. Then he smiled. It was small, quiet, barely there, but unmistakable. Andrea covered her mouth. It wasn't just the smile. It was the recognition in his eyes, the unspoken understanding between the words. Something sacred had passed between two people who had never met, but somehow already knew each other. She whispered, "He saw you, Liam?" And Liam, without a word, gently touched the photo. Then, almost ritualistically, he mimicked the John Wick walk. Just a few steps forward, slow and steady, then stopped and stood tall, eyes focused. Andrea watched, tears finally falling, not because she was sad, but because someone who had meant so much from afar had now reached across the invisible space between stories and reality and said, "I see you too." And for Liam, that was everything. Andrea couldn't stop looking at the handwriting. There was something so real about it. No printed card, no generic typed line, no publicity spin, just words from one human to another, from Keanu Reeves to Liam. She gently placed the letter in a plastic sleeve, then slid it into a new page of Liam's binder. The one she had labeled Moments That Matter. It already held snapshots from therapy sessions, ticket stubs from a sensory-friendly movie screening, and now, something that felt like magic. Later that evening, Andrea texted a few close friends the news. Most of them knew how much Liam had struggled, how many nights ended in frustration, how many words never came out. The messages lit up quickly. "This is unbelievable. Are you serious? I'm crying." Andrea didn't post it online. Not yet. It didn't feel like something to share with the world right away. It felt too sacred. Instead, she focused on Liam. He carried the letter around the house all day. Sometimes he'd set it on the couch and just sit across from it, watching. Other times, he'd take the signed photo and tuck it gently beside his favorite toy model of a car, one that looked like the Mustang from the movie. That night, Andrea watched him from the hallway as he lined up his three favorite things on the bed: the photo, the car, and a small plush dog that looked vaguely like the beagle from John Wick. He touched each one with care. Then he lay down and pulled his blanket over his shoulders without needing help. She hadn't seen him do that in months. He stared at the ceiling quietly, holding the plush against his chest. Andrea waited a beat longer, then quietly turned off the light, leaving the hallway lamp glowing soft and golden. And somewhere in the stillness of that night, something shifted. For most people, it was just a letter, just a photograph, just ink on a page. But for Liam, it was the world showing up. It was proof that what he loved could love him back. It was proof that someone who seemed untouchable, larger than life, could still kneel down to meet him where he was. Not with speeches, not with gifts, but with a gesture that said, "I hear you, even in your silence." And sometimes, that kind of response was louder than any words ever could be. The next morning, Liam was already up when Andrea walked into the kitchen. He had placed the signed photo on the breakfast table beside his cereal bowl, as if saving a seat for someone. Andrea smiled, but didn't say anything. She'd learned over time that moments like this weren't meant to be narrated. They were meant to be honored. She poured coffee and watched him. He picked up the photo, looked at it, and then slowly turned it around so it faced her. Then, softly, almost imperceptibly, he mouthed something. Andrea leaned in. "What was that, sweetheart?" He didn't repeat it. He just smiled and placed his palm over the letter again. There was no rush to understand, no pressure to decode. It was enough to witness it. Later that day, she brought out a shadow box frame and gently mounted both the letter and the signed image inside it. She added a small caption under the glass. "To Liam, who speaks in ways the world is still learning to hear." She placed it on the wall beside his bedroom door. That night, Liam stood in front of the frame for several minutes, as if reading the whole moment back to himself. Then he reached up and placed a soft kiss against the glass, right where the letter ended with Keanu's name. Andrea watched through tears. In the days that followed, Liam began carrying himself differently. Not louder, not with sudden speech, but with more certainty. He began to walk with just a bit more control in his stride, mimicking Keanu's calm, deliberate posture from the movies. At the grocery store, he paused to hold the door open for a stranger without being asked. At home, he lined up his favorite DVDs in order not by title, but by how much calm each one made him feel. And one evening, without prompting, he looked up from his seat on the couch, raised his hand, and softly signed, "Thank you," to his mom. Andrea almost dropped the dish she was holding. It had taken years to get there. And it wasn't the letter alone that did it, but it was the moment that made everything else feel possible. When someone like Keanu, someone the world saw as untouchable, took the time to write a simple note, it said something bigger than his words. It told a silent boy, "You're worth being heard." And Liam, in his quiet way, had just begun to answer back. 2 days after the letter arrived, Andrea was folding laundry when she heard the soft chime of an email notification. It was from a private address, no subject line. She almost dismissed it as spam until she saw the name in the signature. It was from Keanu Reeves. The message read, "Please find attached a short video for Liam. I hope it brings him a moment of connection. Thank you for letting me be part of his world, even briefly." Andrea froze. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the attachment. The screen turned black for a few seconds. Then Keanu appeared, sitting in what looked like a quiet corner of a studio trailer. No makeup, no Hollywood shine, just a soft blue t-shirt, a curtain behind him, and eyes that carried depth. He looked directly into the lens. "Hey Liam, I'm Keanu." His voice was steady, low, and careful, paced deliberately, as if he knew someone on the other end needed the space between the words. "I just wanted to say, I saw the video your mom shared, and I think you're amazing." He smiled gently, then lifted his hand in a slow wave. "You're strong, focused, a real fighter, just like John." Andrea covered her mouth. The tone wasn't performative. It wasn't just a celebrity speaking to a fan. It was something smaller, closer. Keanu leaned slightly forward and continued, "Thank you for walking with me. I saw your walk, and man, it was perfect." He gave a small thumbs up, then paused again. "I'd be honored if you'd keep walking. And if one day you ever want to talk, I'll listen." He finished with a gentle nod, then reached up and touched his chest, just over his heart. No words, just that. Andrea had been recording the moment from the side. She panned over to Liam, who was sitting cross-legged on the carpet in his Batman pajamas, eyes locked on the screen. As the video played, something shifted. His back straightened, his breathing slowed. And when Keanu lifted his hand and made that heart tap gesture, Liam mirrored it. Slowly, carefully, his small hand touched the center of his chest. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. When the video ended, Liam stood up, walked over to the framed photo on the table, the one signed by Keanu, and placed both hands on the glass. His fingers were trembling, but his face was calm. Andrea didn't say a word. She just let the moment unfold. Later that evening, Andrea played the video again. This time, Liam was sitting closer to the screen, his hand already resting against his chest before Keanu did the gesture. He mouthed a word during the second viewing, softly, uncertainly, but with intention. She couldn't catch what it was, but he was trying. That night, Andrea placed the signed photo in a frame and set it beside Liam's bed. He carefully picked it up and held it against his chest, then slid it under his pillow without saying a word. It wasn't just a keepsake anymore. It was a lifeline, a tether, something that reached into the quietest places of her son's world and said, "I see you." Before bed, Liam did something he hadn't done in years. He walked down the hall, went to the kitchen, and opened the fridge. "Juice," he whispered. Andrea turned around so fast she nearly dropped the spoon she was holding. Her breath caught. She didn't move toward him. She didn't want to interrupt it. She only nodded, tears filling her eyes. It was the first word he had spoken aloud in days, maybe weeks. He poured the juice himself, then returned to the living room. The walk was familiar again, slow, purposeful, shoulders back. He didn't break character. He didn't have to. His whole body was speaking now. Andrea knew this wasn't a miracle cure. She knew autism didn't vanish with one moment of recognition or one kind message. But what had changed was something deeper than words. Liam was reclaiming something. Maybe confidence, maybe rhythm, maybe himself. The next morning, Liam was already up when she came into the living room. He was sitting by the window, holding the letter. He tapped the envelope twice and looked at her. "You keep that safe, okay?" she said, kneeling beside him. "That letter's for you. That's your strength right there." He nodded once. Then he made the gesture again, the one Keanu had made. Hand to chest. A pause. And then he reached over, touching hers. Andrea broke. Not loudly, not in a panic, just a slow unraveling. She leaned into him and whispered, "You are so seen, baby. You are so seen." He didn't respond, but he didn't need to. His presence, his connection, was enough. That evening, she wrote a short post online with just one sentence. "I said juice today." Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, parents cheering, advocates sharing, and somewhere miles away, a man with dark hair and a gentle soul read it on his phone, smiled to himself, and said softly, "Good job, Liam." The days that followed were filled with subtle but powerful shifts. Liam began doing more of his routines independently, brushing his hair, setting the table, even writing letters in his notebook again. He didn't speak often, but when he did, Andrea didn't interrupt or celebrate too loudly. She simply acknowledged the effort with quiet joy. They watched the video again every night before bed, not as an obsession, but as a grounding ritual. It became a form of meditation for Liam. Keanu's voice, steady and slow, reminded him of balance, of space, of calm in a world that often felt too loud, too fast, too much. One night, as Andrea was folding laundry, Liam placed his tablet on the table and opened the camera. He positioned it to record, just like he'd seen her do. Then he made the same gesture Keanu had made. Hand to chest. Pause. Then he spoke, barely above a whisper but clear enough to catch. "Thank you, John." Andrea turned, hands frozen in mid-fold. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Liam paused the video, replayed it, then played it again and again. It was his way of rehearsing, remembering, owning the moment. The next day, she uploaded the clip to the same page where she'd first shared their story. She added only 4 words. He called him John. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people commented. Some were therapists, others were strangers. All were moved. They didn't marvel at the celebrity connection. They celebrated the transformation, the human connection. The boy who had found something to say and someone who had helped him say it. A few days later, a package arrived. No name on the return label. Inside, a replica gold coin from the John Wick films. A message written on a small card in careful black ink. To Liam, from one quiet fighter to another. Okay? Beneath the card was a photo of the Continental Hotel prop set, signed once again. And tucked below that, a folded note written on plain white paper. Andrea opened it slowly, unsure what to expect. It read, "Every word matters, even the ones we wait years to hear." She placed the letter on Liam's nightstand beside the framed picture and the coin. That night, for the first time, Liam tucked himself in. As Andrea turned out the light, he looked at her and said quietly, "I'm okay." And she believed him. The email came on a quiet Thursday morning. Andrea almost deleted it, assuming it was spam. The subject line was simple: a note from Keanu Reeves. Her heart skipped. She clicked it. The message wasn't long, no branding, no PR language, just a few lines, calm and kind. "Hi, Andrea. I read your post and I saw Liam's video. If it's all right with you, I'd like to visit Portland soon. No press, no media, just a quiet hello." He signed it himself? Andrea stared at the screen. Her coffee went cold. It didn't feel real. She reread the message 4 times. Then, hand trembling slightly, she replied, "We'd be honored. Thank you for seeing him." They agreed on a date just 3 days away. Keanu's team coordinated a time and a location, but made one request: a quiet, sensory-friendly environment. No cameras, no announcement, just presence. Andrea suggested a local space she'd taken Liam to often: the Lotus Room. It was a calming community center that had private rooms designed for children with sensory sensitivities. Dim lighting, soft textures, no harsh sounds. It was a sanctuary for Liam, and she hoped it would be enough. When she told Liam someone special was coming, he didn't respond with words, but he smiled. A wide, open, unfiltered smile. Then he went to his small bookshelf, pulled out a neatly folded black blazer, and laid it gently on his bed. The next day, Andrea found him brushing his hair in the mirror without being asked. He set his favorite toy dog on the dresser beside a pair of borrowed black shoes. His posture mimicked something, someone. The way he stood, the way he glanced sideways, almost mirrored Keanu's quiet body language in John Wick. Andrea didn't say a word. She just watched from the hallway, heart aching and full at once. That evening, she packed a small bag with Liam's essentials: his calming chew necklace, a water bottle, a copy of his favorite comic, and the signed photo from Keanu, now laminated and kept in a Ziploc bag so he could carry it everywhere. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing: Liam was ready. When morning came, Liam didn't need waking. He was already dressed, sitting at the kitchen table, legs swinging slightly. He looked up as Andrea entered the room, then reached across the table and tapped her hand. It was his way of saying, "Thank you." Andrea nodded, smiling through tears. They arrived at the Lotus Room 15 minutes early. Andrea held Liam's hand as they stepped inside the familiar space, greeted by soft music and the faint scent of lavender. The lights were low, and the main room had already been reserved for them. A staff member quietly guided them to a private side room filled with beanbag chairs, sensory toys, and a low, cushioned bench near the window. Liam immediately sat cross-legged on the floor, placing his toy dog beside him and then adjusting the creases in his blazer. His fingers tapped rhythmically against his knees. Steady, predictable, comforting. Andrea didn't know what to expect. She kept checking the time, her heart fluttering faster with each passing minute. She had no idea if this would be a 5-minute meet and greet or something more. In truth, she didn't need anything more. Keanu had already given them more than most people ever did: acknowledgement. At exactly 11:00 a.m., there was a quiet knock at the side door. Andrea stood. Liam looked up. The door opened slowly, and there he was. Dressed simply in jeans and a dark gray coat, Keanu stepped inside with no entourage, no fanfare. He held a small canvas bag in one hand and gently closed the door behind him. Andrea's breath caught. Liam didn't move, just stared. Then, as if sensing the energy in the room, Keanu crouched down to Liam's level before speaking. Not loudly, not with forced cheer, just calm, steady, and direct. "Hi, Liam," Keanu said softly. "It's really good to meet you." Liam's eyes flicked to Andrea, then back to Keanu. Slowly, he tilted his head, his version of a nod. Now, Keanu smiled and moved to sit beside him on the floor. He didn't reach out. He didn't crowd him. He just mirrored Liam's position, legs crossed, hands resting loosely in his lap. "I brought something for you," Keanu said after a moment, lifting the small canvas bag and setting it down between them. But only if you want it. Liam reached for the bag. Inside was a replica of the Continental hotel room key from the John Wick movies, made of real brass. Attached to it was a small, personalized tag that read, Liam, member since 2023. There was also a miniature version of John Wick's dog, carved from smooth black resin. Liam held the key gently in his palm, his fingers curling around it like it was a treasure. Andrea sat quietly, tears slipping down her cheeks. She wasn't crying because Keanu had shown up. She was crying because he hadn't come to be a star. He came to be a person, to simply be present. And Liam, he hadn't blinked. He was steady, still, connected. In a world that too often misunderstood her son, someone had finally spoken his language. Keanu didn't rush the moment. He sat quietly with Liam, occasionally glancing toward Andrea with a kind, unspoken understanding, like he knew how hard it was to raise a child who lived mostly in silence. But the room wasn't silent. Not really. It was filled with something rare and powerful. Presence. After a while, Liam began tapping the Continental key against his palm, the soft rhythmic sound filling the space like music only he could hear. Then, he placed the key down on the floor between them, turned to Keanu, and mimicked the same hand gesture Keanu had made in the video message. A slow, open-handed wave, palm slightly tilted, thumb folded in. Andrea gasped. It wasn't just mimicry. It was a greeting, a choice. Keanu returned the same gesture, slowly and exactly. That's when Liam did something he hadn't done in over 4 months. He opened his mouth. Very quietly, almost too softly to hear, he whispered, "Thank you." Andrea covered her mouth with both hands. She didn't move, didn't want to break the spell, but her heart thundered in her chest. Tears streamed freely now. Keanu blinked, visibly moved. "You're welcome, Liam," he said gently. They didn't speak much after that. They didn't need to. Before leaving, Keanu reached into his coat pocket and took out a small black notebook. He handed it to Andrea. On the inside cover it read, "For Liam, who reminds me why I started acting in the first place. Keanu Reeves." Andrea clutched it to her chest. Liam held the key like it was part of him now. The toy dog remained tucked in his blazer pocket, the edges of its ears poking out. Keanu rose to his feet, but didn't make a grand goodbye. He simply knelt beside Liam one last time and said, "You're stronger than you think. Keep walking." Then he left the way he came, quietly, respectfully, without cameras or announcements. After the door closed, Andrea sank to the floor beside her son. He was still holding the key. His lips were moving again. Not words this time, but sound. And that sound meant the world was changing, in a way that couldn't be explained, only felt. Keanu stepped into the sensory-friendly community center with quiet intent, dressed simply in jeans and a black coat. He didn't bring an entourage, no camera crew, no assistants, just himself and a small black case in his hand, the kind of case you might see in a movie. But today, there was no scene to shoot. Only a moment to live. Andrea waited near the door, trying to keep her nerves from showing. She gave him a small, grateful smile, then led him into the softly lit room where Liam sat cross-legged on a cushioned floor mat. The boy wore his black blazer, a quiet nod to his hero, and clutched his toy dog close to his chest. His eyes didn't dart, his fingers didn't twitch. He was still, watching, waiting. Keanu didn't speak right away. He knelt slowly, mirroring Liam's position, not towering over him, not filling the space with noise or performance, just presence. It was as if he'd done this before, not as an actor, but as a man who understood that sometimes words are the last thing a person needs to hear. They sat there like that for nearly 10 minutes. No movement, no conversation, only shared stillness, a kind of sacred silence that didn't beg to be broken. Andrea held her breath, afraid that even the creak of her foot might disrupt the moment. But Liam didn't need protecting today. He was in the eye of his own storm, and sitting right across from him, so was Keanu. Not speaking was the point. Keanu slowly placed the case between them. He didn't open it yet. Instead, he gestured gently, inviting Liam's eyes toward it. Liam glanced down, then back up at Keanu. They exchanged the smallest of nods, like two old friends agreeing on something unspoken. Then Keanu opened the case. Inside were two objects, a gold coin and a round black marker. Both replicas from the John Wick universe, aged just enough to feel real. Andrea didn't know the significance, but she didn't need to. She watched Liam's breath catch in his throat as his eyes locked onto the pieces. His hands loosened their grip on the toy dog. Slowly, reverently, he reached out. His fingers brushed the edge of the marker, then curled around it, then the coin. He didn't lift them right away. He just held them in place. And then he looked up. His lips parted, dry and unsure, as though they hadn't been used in months. "Wick," he said. "Just one word?" Andrea covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes welled instantly. It wasn't loud and it wasn't perfect. His voice was soft, almost breathy, but it was clear. The word had shape, purpose, presence. Keanu didn't react with drama, no gasp, no applause. He only smiled, slowly and fully, his eyes fixed on Liam like they were anchoring the moment. He whispered, just loud enough for the boy to hear, "I've been waiting to hear you say that." Liam's eyes darted between the gift and Keanu's face, then down again to the coin resting in his palm. He tapped it once, then twice, mimicking a scene from the movie where Wick prepared for a journey. Keanu caught the reference and gently echoed the motion, tapping his own knee. A silent agreement, an unspoken ritual. Then, for the first time, Liam reached out, not toward the coin or the case, but toward Keanu. He pressed the coin into Keanu's hand, gently, deliberately. Andrea let out a small sob, the kind you try to swallow but can't. Keanu didn't ask why. He didn't ask anything. He only accepted the coin, nodded, and handed it back. "That belongs with you," he said. "Always has." The two sat in quiet reverence again, this time with the kind of energy that can only come after a miracle, not a loud public one, a private miracle, quiet and sacred and invisible to anyone who didn't understand what it meant to speak one word after years of silence. Keanu leaned back slightly, not to break the moment but to let Liam breathe in his own strength. He looked at Andrea, his expression soft. "You don't have to say anything," she said before he could speak. Thank you for not turning this into something for anyone else." He nodded once. "It's already his," he said. "I'm just visiting." Liam then made another motion. He opened his hand, placed it flat against his heart, and then pointed at Keanu. Andrea nearly collapsed. It was something he used to do when he was a toddler. Before the regression, before the diagnoses, before the silence. A way of saying, "I trust you." Keanu pressed his own hand to his chest, mirroring him once again. No lines, no character, just one man offering dignity to a boy who had found strength in stillness, meaning in quiet, and a hero who walked instead of shouted. Liam gave a soft exhale, then leaned in slowly, resting his shoulder gently against Keanu's arm. They stayed like that for a while, until words for once weren't needed at all. Eventually, Liam grew still, his eyes fluttered shut, not from exhaustion, but from peace. His body relaxed, his hand still lightly wrapped around the gold coin. Keanu remained beside him, quiet, present. Andrea sat across the room, hands clasped tight, watching her son rest against a man he'd never met, but had known, somehow, for years. A staff member peeked in, unsure whether to speak. Andrea gently motioned that everything was okay. Keanu glanced down at Liam again. Then, slowly, carefully, he placed a small black pouch beside the boy. Inside were several polished gold coins. Movie props, yes, but each one real in weight and in meaning. On the drawstring, a tag, "For the one who walks with purpose." Andrea opened her mouth to thank him again, but Keanu shook his head with a soft smile. "This one's between us," he whispered. As he stood, Liam stirred briefly, and Keanu lightly placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. Not to wake him, just to remind him. He was seen. He was known. Before leaving, Keanu turned to Andrea and said, "You gave him more than a voice. You gave him someone worth speaking to." Andrea blinked hard. "You have no idea what this means." "I think I do," Keanu said, his voice low. "Because there was a time when someone just sat beside me. Didn't say much. Just stayed. Sometimes that's what saves you." He didn't linger, he didn't take pictures, he didn't ask for anything, just nodded one last time, slipped out the door, and left behind a room where something sacred had happened. Liam slept for over an hour, the first time he had napped peacefully in the daytime in months. When he woke, Andrea said nothing. She didn't rush him. She didn't ask questions. She only watched as he reached for the pouch and hugged it to his chest. Then, without prompting, he whispered again, "Friend." The word hung in the air like a prayer. Andrea gently wiped her eyes, her heart full, her silence louder than any cheer. She didn't know what tomorrow would hold, or if Liam would speak again soon. But this moment, this one, was enough. Later that evening, Andrea tucked him in, and just before turning off the light, she saw it. The signed photo, placed gently under his pillow again, right beside the pouch of coins. The boy who had once only spoken through silence had found a reason to speak, and in doing so, reminded the world that sometimes the smallest words hold the deepest truths. Andrea's knees gave out before she could reach the chair behind her. She collapsed into it, hands trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. The word still echoed faintly in the quiet room, hanging in the air like a miracle, trying to land gently. Wick. It had come so softly, barely more than a whisper, but clear, intentional, real. For months, her son had lived in a world of silent gestures and stillness. Words had disappeared from his world, slipping away like sand between fingers, one by one, until there was only quiet. Therapists, specialists, alternative programs, none had unlocked the space where his voice had gone. She had begun to wonder if it was gone forever. And then, that one word. Liam hadn't flinched after saying it. He simply held the coin in one hand and the marker in the other, turning them gently. Keanu sat across from him, mirroring his stillness, his presence calm and wide, like a lake with no ripples. He didn't respond with a gasp or praise. He didn't look to Andrea with raised eyebrows or celebration. He simply nodded. "Yeah," Keanu said gently, like a thread, tying it all together. "Wick." Liam blinked. Then, ever so slightly, he smiled. Andrea pressed both palms to her mouth, trying to hold back the sob that surged inside her. But it was too much. The moment cracked her open. She had prayed for years, for hope, for words, for any small window into Liam's mind. And here it was, not with fireworks, not in a hospital, but in a quiet sensory room, beside a man who didn't ask for explanations. Only connection. Keanu didn't stand or leave or move to the next thing. He simply placed one hand on Andrea's shoulder. It wasn't a grand gesture. There were no words, just weight. Steady, grounding, gentle. A staff member at the center had been watching from the side, unseen. She quietly stepped over, kneeling beside Andrea. "That's the first word we've heard him speak in 8 months," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We record progress for every child, and I think this is something we'll never be able to measure properly." Andrea could only nod, eyes swimming, hands now resting on her lap as she tried to remember how to breathe again. Liam was still turning the replica gold coin in his palm, watching the light bounce off its surface. He reached over and tapped the toy dog beside him once, his usual gesture for comfort. Keanu responded by giving the toy dog a tiny bow of his head, like they shared some ancient code. Liam made a soft huff of air that sounded close to a laugh. The group moved into the lunchroom slowly, giving Liam time to adjust. The sensory-friendly facility had dimmed lighting, soft acoustic panels, and wide-open spaces. Exactly the kind of environment where Liam could feel safe. Andrea had packed his lunch in advance. Turkey slices, apple wedges, and 3 crackers arranged in perfect symmetry. She placed them gently on a plate and handed it to him. Keanu didn't ask questions. He simply mirrored what Liam did, sat the same way, took a sip of water when Liam did, even placed his own sandwich diagonally on the plate like Liam had. It wasn't mimicry, it was respect. Liam kept glancing at Keanu as if trying to decide whether he was still real. Andrea could see it in his eyes, that cautious hope that someone he idolized wasn't just on a screen anymore. He was here, with him, sitting beside him, eating lunch like they were just 2 guys hanging out. Keanu leaned back slightly and offered a calm smile. "You know," he said slowly, "I think quiet people hear things the rest of us miss." Liam tilted his head, listening. "And when you speak," Keanu continued, "you don't waste it. That's powerful." Andrea watched her son absorb every word, his fingers still tracing the shape of the marker prop. She could feel something building inside him. Not another word, not yet, but something deeper. A readiness. A connection. After lunch, one of the therapists brought over a simple hand game, soft foam tiles with colored shapes that matched in a specific rhythm. It was something Liam usually ignored, but today he reached for it. Keanu reached for the other side. They took turns silently. Red triangle, green circle, blue square, then red triangle again. No words, just rhythm. Andrea pressed her hand to her heart. This wasn't therapy. It was presence. It was communion. For the first time, Liam didn't flinch when someone got a tile wrong. He simply paused, waited, and smiled at Keanu, like a teacher forgiving a student for not getting it right the first time. And Keanu? He smiled right back. "You're better at this than I am," Keanu said softly, and Liam's mouth curled at the edges. Again, Andrea felt something shift inside her. For years, she had chased connection with her son through flashcards, routines, programs, but today, all it took was someone meeting him where he was. Without noise, without expectation, just presence. As the afternoon sunlight filtered through the wide windows, Keanu leaned forward just slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. Liam stood and began pacing softly in a small loop, a calming habit. But this time, instead of retreating into himself, he paused beside Keanu and placed the coin replica gently in his hand. Then, just above a whisper, came the second word. "Friend." Andrea gasped and covered her mouth. A staff member nearby froze mid-step. It was quiet, so quiet the moment could have disappeared. But it didn't. It settled into the room like grace. Keanu didn't flinch or make a big gesture. He looked at Liam and nodded, solemn and steady. "Yes," he replied, "always." It was the kind of moment people chase their entire lives, a single word that rewired the air around it. Not a performance, not a breakthrough engineered by therapy, but one born of safety, of someone being seen, not as broken, not as a project, but as whole. They sat together again, just the 2 of them, until it was time to part ways. No ceremony, no autographs, just Keanu placing a hand over his heart and giving Liam a final bow of respect. Liam mirrored it perfectly. On the drive home, Andrea didn't cry. She held the silence like something sacred. Liam sat in the back seat, holding the photo and the coin, humming gently. a sound she hadn't heard since he was 8. That night, Andrea posted one sentence. "He didn't try to fix my son. He just met him." The post quietly gathered thousands of shares. Hundreds of parents commented, dozens of therapists, many wrote, "This is what we wish the world understood." A few hours later, someone shared the video of Liam watching Keanu's message again, mimicking the hand motion, mouthing the word. And someone commented, "Can a single moment change everything? Tell us about a time someone surprised you in the best way." The replies began to pour in. Stories of teachers who stayed after class, nurses who held hands, strangers who showed up when no one else did. A ripple of humanity sparked by one act of stillness. And at the center of it all, a boy named Liam, who found his voice not through volume, but through being seen. Ethan West had always felt like the background character in someone else's movie. He didn't say it aloud, not even to his parents, but it lingered. In every family photo, every holiday gathering, every IEP meeting for his younger brother Liam, Ethan was the quiet blur just outside the frame. He loved his brother, but love and loneliness can live side by side, and Ethan knew that better than most. Now, 18 and a senior in high school, Ethan had long since stopped expecting moments that belonged solely to him. He didn't resent Liam's needs. What hurt was that no one ever asked about his. While Andrea dedicated every ounce of energy to therapies, schedules, and specialists, Ethan learned how to shrink himself. He taught himself to cook, to drive, to fix a leaking faucet, without fanfare or praise. "You're so mature," teachers would say, not realizing that maturity, born of necessity, often feels like silent grief. But something changed the day Keanu Reeves walked into that sensory center in Portland. At first, Ethan thought it was a joke. His mom hadn't told him much, just that someone special was coming to see Liam. Ethan assumed it'd be a therapist or local volunteer. Not him. Not the man who played Neo in John Wick. Not the person his brother had studied and emulated with laser-like focus. Ethan hadn't even planned to come. He had a paper due and was tired of sitting in rooms where no one looked his way. But something tugged at him that morning, a strange hunch. So he went. He didn't expect to feel anything. He didn't expect to see anything. But what he witnessed that day unraveled something long wrapped in layers of bitterness. Keanu didn't walk in with cameras or handlers or a booming voice. He walked in like he was entering sacred space. He knelt beside Liam without speaking, sat with him in stillness, matched his quiet, not rushing, not performing, just being there. Ethan watched from the corner of the room, arms folded, skeptical but curious. Then, when Keanu pulled out the black velvet case and revealed the gold coin and the marker from John Wick, Ethan caught something in his brother's eyes. Not excitement exactly, not even joy. Something deeper. Recognition. Liam reached for the gift and then, clear and soft, said a single word. "Wick." Ethan's chest cracked open. Andrea burst into tears. The staff gasped. But Ethan didn't move. He just stared at his brother and thought, he said something. Not just any word. A word he chose. A word that mattered. It wasn't that Ethan needed his brother to speak to feel connected, but in that moment he felt like they had been seen, both of them, not as problems or burdens or brave survivors, but as a family. As boys growing up in a house filled with love and limits. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like the background character. He felt like someone in the scene. That night, after dinner and the quiet buzz of emotions had settled, Ethan sat on his bed staring at a blank screen. For years he'd journaled, privately, writing thoughts he never said aloud, especially not to his parents. But this time felt different. This time, he wanted to share something real. He opened a new post on the family's blog that had mostly been used to update friends and relatives about Liam's condition. He titled the entry, "The Day Keanu Let My Brother Shine." Then he began to write. "I've never been a fan of celebrities, not because I dislike them, but because I never really believed they lived in the same world as us. They felt too far away, like posters on a wall, not people. My brother Liam has autism. He doesn't talk much, doesn't like noise or eye contact or sudden changes, but he loves John Wick. Not the fights, the walk, the way he moves, the way he stands tall when everything's falling apart. Today, Keanu Reeves came to meet my brother. Not for an interview, not for a viral video, just to sit with him. And he didn't talk at Liam. He didn't perform. He didn't pity him. He met him. I watched the man I've only ever seen on movie posters become someone I'll never forget. And in that room, something happened. Liam said a word, just one, but it was like the world opened for a second. I've never been so proud, not just of Liam, but of being his brother. Ethan paused, staring at the words. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the feeling that something in him had moved. A weight he hadn't noticed was there started to lift. He finished the post with a quiet line. If you ever feel like you're invisible, know this. Sometimes the smallest moments let you be seen. Today, my brother was seen, and maybe I was too. He hit publish and shut the laptop. The next morning, they woke up to hundreds of messages. Strangers from across the world, other siblings of neurodiverse kids wrote in the comments. Thank you for putting this into words. I'm the big sister of a boy like Liam. This made me cry. Keanu did what we all wish people would do. Just see us. One message simply read, to rescue your brother. He witnessed him. That's the kind of hero we need. Ethan showed the comments to Andrea, who smiled and wrapped him in a long overdue hug. You've always been part of this story, she whispered. For the first time in a long time, Ethan believed it. Later that week, the local paper picked up Ethan's blog post. They didn't change the title or quote only the famous name. Instead, they printed it nearly in full, just as it was. Real, honest, unpolished. The story of a brother learning how to step out of the shadows, not in bitterness, but in quiet awe of a moment that belonged to his family. A teacher from Ethan's high school emailed him personally, saying, "You reminded me why I got into this job." Even more surprisingly, the head of a national organization supporting siblings of children with disabilities reached out and asked to reprint the piece in their next newsletter. Ethan was stunned. For years he had felt like the background character in his own life. But now, people weren't just reading. At dinner, Ethan shared that news with the family. Liam, sitting across from him, looked up. No words, just eye contact that lasted 3 full seconds. It was brief, barely noticeable to most. But to Ethan, it was everything. He smiled back and gave a small nod. I see you too, he whispered. Later that night, Andrea found Ethan sitting on the back porch with his laptop. He wasn't writing, just sitting. She sat beside him. You okay? She asked gently. Yeah, he said, better than okay. For the first time, I feel like I'm not just orbiting Liam's world. I'm part of it. Andrea placed her hand on his shoulder, eyes full of something that words couldn't quite hold. Gratitude, relief, love. You always have been, she said. Ethan exhaled slowly. Then he looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, a Hollywood actor who never asked for attention had reminded a teenager not just that his brother mattered, but that he did too. The post continued to make its rounds online, now bookmarked by autism support groups, mental health counselors, and even a few actor fan pages that captioned it. Al didn't try to fix him, he just saw him. And for Ethan, that line said it all. In a world so quick to solve, to speak, to act, someone had finally just paused long enough to connect. And through that stillness, 2 brothers found a new kind of closeness. Not in grand gestures, but in shared moments. In a word, in a walk, and in the day a man known for silence showed them that sometimes being present is the loudest love there is. The week after Liam met Keanu, the staff at the local sensory center gathered for a routine check-in. The meeting was meant to cover upcoming events and feedback from families, but something unusual had happened the day before that couldn't wait. A sealed envelope had arrived early in the morning. No return address, no note, just the name of the center written in neat handwriting. Inside, the director found a check, large enough to fund a full renovation of their small sensory-friendly screening room. Along with it was a handwritten line on cream stationery. For the ones who sit quietly, feeling everything, you are seen. The director looked around the room of stunned staff, some teary-eyed, others silent. There was no signature, but they didn't need one. They knew. Within 2 weeks, construction had begun. The tiny screening space was transformed. New sound dampening panels were installed, adjustable LED lighting was added, and special chairs with weighted blankets tucked inside their arms were brought in. A soft sign in the hallway led visitors in. It read, "Liam's Quiet Theater." Andrea walked into the space on the morning of its unveiling, holding Liam's hand. Her son, usually wary of change, didn't hesitate. He stepped inside as if he already belonged. And maybe he did. That night, the center hosted its first expanded autism-friendly movie night in the new space. Families arrived slowly at first, some with noise-canceling headphones, others carrying their child's favorite toy or fidget. No one was hurried. No one had to explain. A volunteer handed out programs printed with pictures instead of words, helping nonverbal kids choose their movie snacks. The air smelled faintly of buttered popcorn, but the sound was muted, soft. Just enough. The movie wasn't about superheroes or explosions. It was a quiet animated film about a boy and his cat who wandered the city together, searching for home. As the film played, a small boy in the second row leaned against his mother and whispered, "He's like me." She didn't respond out loud. She just nodded, tears forming. Across the room, Andrea caught her breath. This wasn't just Liam's moment anymore. The circle was widening. A few seats down, a father gently signed a few simple words into his daughter's palm while she smiled and watched the screen. A teenager with noise sensitivity gently rocked side to side in a corner, mouthing lines from the film. No one stared. No one told him to stop. In the very back row, Liam sat next to Ethan, who had joined them for the evening. They didn't talk, but they didn't have to. Liam clutched his John Wick coin in one hand and his brother's sleeve with the other. Ethan didn't move. He just stayed. The story wasn't over. Word about the renovated theater began to spread through the Portland neurodiverse community. At first, it was just whispers in support groups and autism resource forums. Parents cautiously asking, "Has anyone been to Liam's Quiet Theater yet?" Then came the stories. A mother shared a photo of her daughter, who hadn't left their home for months due to sensory overwhelm. She was now sitting, hands calmly folded, watching a gentle animated movie in the new theater. Another family posted that their nonverbal son had pointed to the sign outside and said, "For the first time in public, Liam." That was all, just the name, but it carried weight, like a bridge had formed between his world and everyone else's. The staff printed out these testimonies and quietly taped them on the bulletin board in the hallway. Not for marketing, not for clout, just to remind themselves what this space meant. One night after a community screening, the director overheard 2 teenage boys talking as they left the room. One had autism, the other didn't. They were both regulars. "This place," one said, adjusting his hoodie, "feels like a hug." The other nodded. "Like I don't have to explain myself." Andrea continued to bring Liam often. He never said much, but he always sat in the same seat, third from the back, aisle side, one hand resting on the soft armrest, the other holding his coin. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen, but every now and then he'd glance around, taking it all in. The families, the space, the calm. And once, during a showing of a nature documentary, he leaned over to his mom and simply said, "Stay." It was a whisper, barely there. But Andrea heard it, and it meant everything. She wasn't the only one. That same week, a man who volunteered as a janitor at the center left a short note in the staff lounge. "I've worked in a lot of places," he wrote, "but this is the only one where I've seen silence turn into a language. Whatever made this possible, thank you." That night he stayed late. He swept slowly, carefully, around the baseboards of the theater. When he reached Liam's row, he paused, looking at the small scuff marks from shoes that had fidgeted against the floor. He didn't clean them. He left them there, because sometimes the quietest moments leave the deepest mark. As the theater continued to draw in more families, the small changes began to ripple outward. Parents who once felt alone now had a place to nod at each other in passing, to share coffee in the lobby while their kids felt peace in the screening room. The theater became more than a space. It became a symbol. Someone left a handmade sign on the door one afternoon. It wasn't official, just taped in place with blue painter's tape. It read, "No judgment past this point, just joy." Below it, someone else added in pen, "And quiet, lots of it." It stayed there, untouched, for months. On a Saturday evening, the Sensory Center hosted a small event called the Night of Thanks. There were no speeches, no stage, just a circle of chairs, dimmed lights, and soft music playing in the background. Andrea was invited to speak, but instead passed the note she'd written ahead of time to the director to read aloud. It said, "To the person who gave my son a reason to show up in the world again. You didn't need to fix him. You just made room for him. And in that room, he began to bloom." That night, a little girl left a drawing on the lobby table, a crayon sketch of a tall man beside a boy holding a coin. Above their heads were stars. One had a small label written in block letters, "Liam's Light." Keanu never asked for recognition, but when the director sent him a photo of the drawing, he responded simply with, "Tell her I see it, and it's beautiful." As the months passed, the screen in Liam's quiet theater became a canvas of courage for dozens of children and teens. Some laughed louder than they ever had. Others just sat, still and quiet, knowing they belonged. Families began leaving notes on the theater's back wall. Little messages, short truths. "I feel safe here. My brother smiled here for the first time. My daughter said thank you out loud. I've never heard her say that before. I didn't think anyone saw us, but someone did." Each note was a piece of something bigger, a chorus of voices that once felt muted, now rising, not in volume, but in presence. And taped next to them all, near the top right corner of the wall, was the original sign from that first night. Liam's Quiet Theater. Still laminated, still simple, still changing lives, one still moment at a time. The first thing Liam did when he got home from the Sensory Center wasn't what Andrea expected. There was no celebration, no sudden burst of words, no reaction that might be captured for social media. Instead, he quietly went to his room, opened the small wooden box on his desk, and gently placed the replica John Wick coin and the marker inside. Beside them, he arranged the printout of Keanu's handwritten letter, carefully smoothing the edges so it lay flat. Andrea stood by the door, watching in silence. She'd seen her son line up toys before, sort Legos by color or organize puzzle pieces, but this was something else. It was reverent, ritualistic, every motion deliberate, slow and full of intent. He wasn't just storing objects, he was building a memory altar. She walked away without saying anything, afraid to disturb the moment. In the kitchen, she gripped the counter and exhaled. This wasn't about words, it never had been. It was about connection, meaning, and presence. Later that evening, Andrea peeked into Liam's room again. The lights were dimmed. The box sat on his shelf, centered, with a small flashlight shining softly on it like a spotlight. Next to it, Liam had added a photo of their family, the one from last summer when they visited the coast. It was the only picture where he was smiling. She walked in slowly, sat on the edge of his bed and whispered, "That's a beautiful shelf, sweetheart." Liam didn't speak, but he patted the box once with his palm. Then he looked at her and smiled. It was quick, almost hesitant, but it was there. Andrea's eyes welled up. That one small gesture meant more than any sentence ever could. For him, she murmured, "That's a thank you." The next morning, she found something else. Tucked into the corner of the shelf was a drawing. It was rough, done in pencil and marker, but unmistakable. It was of a man in a long black coat, standing tall next to a boy holding a coin. Above the figures were 3 words in shaky handwriting. "You saw me." Andrea clutched the drawing to her chest. She didn't know when he'd done it or how long he had been planning it. All she knew was that her son, who once went months without looking anyone in the eye, had found a way to say something that needed no translation. Andrea wanted to preserve that drawing forever, but she knew better than to move it without asking. So she sat beside Liam later that day, pointed gently to the sketch and asked, "Can I put this in a frame for you?" He looked at it, then back at her, and gave a single nod. That was all the permission she needed. She found an old picture frame in a closet drawer, cleaned the glass, and carefully placed the drawing inside. When she returned to Liam's room, he was already rearranging his shelf. The coin and marker were now perfectly spaced apart, the letter folded neatly behind them. Liam made space in the center, and she knew that was where the drawing would go. As she placed the framed picture gently into its new spot, Liam stepped back and stared at it. His fingers lightly traced the edge of the frame before resting on the word "saw." He didn't speak. He didn't need to. It became a morning ritual. Before breakfast, Liam would stand in front of the shelf, sometimes just for a second, sometimes for several minutes. Andrea would pass by the doorway and see him there, completely still. Not fixated, anchored. That shelf wasn't a shrine to Keanu. It wasn't about celebrity or movies or collectibles. It was about a moment in time when someone had seen him not as a diagnosis, not as a challenge, but as a whole person. Later that week, Andrea invited Ethan to see it. Her older son had been spending more time at a friend's house since the visit, needing space, needing time. When he stepped into Liam's room, his usual skeptical shell softened. He looked at the coin, the letter, the drawing, and then at Liam. "This is your Wick shelf?" he asked gently. Liam didn't look away. He simply reached out and tapped the photo of their family. Ethan swallowed hard. "That's us." Andrea watched from the hallway, silent. Liam wasn't just connecting to Keanu anymore. He was reconnecting to his brother, to his family, to the world that had once felt too overwhelming to step into. That night, Ethan told his mom something she hadn't expected. "I used to wish Liam would change," he said. "But now, I think the world's just been too loud for him to show us who he already is." Andrea didn't say anything. She just held him close and nodded, because she knew exactly what he meant. A few weeks later, Andrea printed a small label and taped it gently to the underside of Liam's wooden box. It read, "Proof that someone understood. Not for show, not for anyone else to see. Just a quiet marker for the boy who once didn't speak, and the world that finally started listening." One evening, she found Liam in the living room watching one of the quieter scenes from John Wick. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't action. It was just Keanu, walking down a hallway, carrying loss like a shadow. Liam sat forward, his eyes focused, then gently mimicked the walk from memory. His pace was slow, steady, grounded. Then he turned around, walked back to the shelf, and placed his hand on the glass of the frame, the one that held the drawing, the coin, the letter. Andrea asked softly, "What do you want to do now?" Liam tapped the letter once. Then, surprisingly, he pointed to a blank notebook sitting on his bed. "Want to write?" she asked, blinking back tears. No words came, but Liam opened the book and wrote one word in bold, careful print. "More." Andrea sat beside him, heart full. Not more gifts, not more noise, just more of this. More quiet connection, more mornings by the shelf, more days where he wasn't asked to be anything other than exactly who he was. And for the first time, she believed truly believed that more was possible. Because sometimes all it takes is a shelf, a coin, and a man who walked into their lives without trying to fix anything, and somehow helped them see that nothing was broken in the first place. It happened during a film festival Q&A in Austin. Keanu was there, promoting a small indie project, something quiet, poetic, with none of the typical Hollywood flash. The moderator, a local journalist known for human-centered questions, leaned forward near the end of the panel and asked something unexpected. "There's a story trending about you and a boy named Liam, nonverbal, autism, something about a gold coin?" The room hushed. Phones came out, cameras zoomed. It wasn't a trap. It wasn't clickbait. Just a moment of sincere curiosity from someone who had clearly been moved. Keanu paused. His hand lightly brushed the edge of the table as he gathered his thoughts. He didn't smile the way actors often do when they deflect praise. He looked down, took a breath, and then lifted his eyes again. "It wasn't about the movies," he said softly. "It was about being seen." There was a noticeable stillness in the auditorium. Hal didn't need me to perform. He didn't want a selfie, he just walked with me. And I walked with him. The moderator nodded, visibly touched. "You gave him something he'll carry forever." Keanu gently shook his head. "No, Liam did the hard work. I just showed up." The audience didn't clap right away. Not because they didn't want to, but because something about the way he said it deserved silence first. The kind that stretches out into reflection, into awe. Then, slowly, people began to applaud. Not the roaring kind of applause that comes with blockbuster trailers or surprise announcements, but something softer, more reverent. After the event, that clip, just 1 minute and 20 seconds long, was posted online by a college student in the third row. She didn't add hashtags or edits, just the raw video with the caption, "This made me cry. Walk with Liam." By midnight, the tag had been used over 100,000 times. By the next morning, Walk with Liam was trending in multiple countries. But unlike most viral moments, this wasn't about spectacle. There were no wild memes, no loud arguments in the comments. It became a thread of quiet testimonies, shared from one stranger to another. A teacher in Illinois posted, "I had a student just like Liam. He drew instead of speaking. We watched The Matrix together once, and he didn't look away for the entire film. That's when I started teaching with visuals more than words." A man from Poland wrote, "My son hasn't spoken since he was 6. We watched Keanu's clip today. He smiled, first time in months." The story spread beyond fandoms and news sites. Autism organizations reposted it with captions like, "Representation isn't always in the spotlight. Sometimes it's in a slow walk, a coin, a whisper." And Keanu? He never followed up with another public comment. No statement, no interview tour. But during a different panel 2 weeks later, this one with a small audience of student filmmakers, someone asked him how he stays grounded in an industry built on noise. He chuckled softly. "I like quiet places," he said. "But more than that, I like when someone lets me sit with them in silence." Then he added more seriously, "There was a boy. He let me sit in his world. That's the greatest honor." Again, he didn't say Liam's name, but everyone who had followed the story knew. That moment, gentle, raw, sincere, was clipped and shared again. Not because Keanu was a celebrity, but because he had done what few people in the spotlight do. He didn't center himself. Instead, he redirected the world's attention to someone often left out of the narrative. And just like that, the story kept growing, not louder, but deeper. By the end of the week, a quiet ripple of change was underway. Not a movement, not a campaign, but a shift. Hospitals started resharing resources about sensory-friendly spaces. Teachers circulated the clip at staff meetings. Parents emailed it to relatives who had never understood their kids. And always, beneath each post, the same hashtag, Walk with Liam. The interviewer hesitates before asking her final question. Keanu, if Liam could hear you right now and truly understand everything behind your silence, what would you want him to know? Keanu doesn't answer right away. He looks down, runs a hand slowly across the tabletop as if searching for the right shape of truth. Then, his voice low and even, he speaks. I'd want him to know I saw him. The audience doesn't stir. The crew, even off camera, stops moving. There's a hush, the kind that only comes when something real is happening. I saw how hard he tries just to be in the world. I saw the strength it takes just to show up. And I saw love in its most powerful form, not loud, not flashy, just there. He shifts slightly in his chair, eyes now glistening. People think heroes always run into burning buildings or punch through walls, but sometimes a hero is just a kid who holds on to hope through silence, who dares to care, who watches a movie not for action, but for stillness, for balance. The interviewer doesn't speak again. There's nothing more to add. The clip ends up going viral that night, not because it's dramatic, but because it's honest. People share it with captions like, "This is how you honor someone," or "A lesson in humility and presence." But back in Portland, Ethan watches the clip from his laptop, sitting beside Liam on the floor. He nudges his little brother's shoulder gently and says, "He saw you, Liam." And for the second time that week, Liam speaks. Barely audible but unmistakably clear, he whispers, "Friend." Andrea, just outside the door, covers her mouth. That one word, just one, is more than enough. The bedroom door, once closed to visitors, now opened with purpose. What had been Liam's quiet haven, his space to self-regulate, to observe the world from the safety of stillness, was becoming something new. Not a replacement, a transformation. Andrea stood in the center of the room, with her hands lightly touching the edge of Liam's old bookshelf. It still smelled faintly of the lavender sachets she used to tuck into his drawers. The soft gray walls were untouched, the carpet worn where Liam had once paced in calm repetition. But now, new shelves lined one side of the room, filled with books curated for children with sensory needs. Thicker paper, large print, stories that offered comfort, not noise. On the opposite wall she had placed the letter. Framed carefully in reclaimed wood, the note from Keanu Reeves was centered above a gently lit display. Below it, the signed photo from John Wick 3 sat beside a small carved plaque that read, "For the boy who walked his own path." Andrea didn't advertise the room. She didn't post about it online or make it part of a foundation, but word spread quietly through the community. One parent told another. A local therapist asked if a client might visit. Soon, children began to come, some in wheelchairs, some with aids, some clinging to a favorite toy, just as Liam once had with his worn plush dog. The first child to leave a message was a 10-year-old named Eli. He stood in front of the letter and stared, unmoving, for a long while. Then he turned to Andrea, holding a folded note written in pencil on lined school paper. Andrea read it later that evening. "I don't talk either, but I like movies. Can I leave a drawing here?" Eli's mother had tears in her eyes as Andrea nodded. Together, they tacked up the drawing, a simple sketch of a man in a suit walking beside a smaller figure, both framed by stars. Eli had labeled it, "Quiet Walk." Each week, more drawings arrived. Some were folded notes, some were scribbles barely legible, but powerful in what they tried to say. One girl left a message in crayon. "I'm learning to walk like John Wick too." Another child left a cut-out heart with a single word glued to it, "Safe." Andrea bought a second corkboard, then a third. She placed a soft chair under the window where Liam used to sit with his headphones. She added dimmable lighting, plush rugs, and a basket of sensory fidgets. A sign by the door read, "This is a room for the quiet ones, the brave ones, the ones still finding their words." The letter wall became more than a tribute. It became a mirror for children who rarely saw themselves reflected in anything. A space where silence wasn't something to fix, but something to honor. It wasn't long before the wall became layered with more than just notes. One family left a photo of their son dressed as John Wick for Halloween. No weapons, just the signature black blazer, the stance, and the look of quiet resolve. They captioned it, "He found his courage in the walk." Another pinned a poem written by a teenage girl who had been nonverbal until age 12. Her final stanza read, "Words don't always live in mouths. Sometimes they live in movement, in stillness, in eyes that understand." Andrea added a small table in the corner where children could sit and draw their letters on site. She stocked it with textured paper, crayons, pencils, and markers with weighted grips. She didn't tell them what to write. She didn't prompt them with questions. The space asked only one thing: be you, exactly as you are. The most profound letters, Andrea found, often didn't come from the children, but from their siblings. One note read, "My little brother can't talk much, but I think he talks to me through our movie nights. Thanks for helping him feel big." Parents stayed longer than they expected. Some cried. Some sat on the carpet with their kids and traced the messages on the wall with their fingers. It became a ritual for new families to walk the perimeter of the room in silence, taking in the collection of voices that didn't come from mouths, but from markers, paper, and careful placement. There was no chaos, no overstimulation, just presence. Keanu's letter, the first one that started it all, sat at the center like a lighthouse. Visitors always paused in front of it. "Dear Liam, thank you for walking with me. It means more than I can say. Keanu." Underneath it now were dozens of replicas, handwritten by other children in their own way. "Dear Liam, thank you for making this place. Dear Keanu, I think I walk like you too. Dear quiet room, you help my brain feel soft." Andrea would sit in the doorway sometimes after everyone left. She never turned on the overhead lights, only the soft yellow sconces that illuminated the wall. From her chair, she could see every taped message, every crinkled piece of art. Each one felt like a continuation of Liam's story, echoing forward. This wasn't a memorial, it was a movement. Alive, growing, stitched together by kids who rarely had a space that belonged to them. Here they weren't visitors in a world too loud to hear them. Here they were the authors. One afternoon, Andrea received a package with no return address. Inside was a framed sketch, delicate pencil lines, hand-drawn, no signature. It showed a boy in a blazer standing beside a taller man, their shadows cast long beneath them. The taller man had a hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder. Behind them stood the letter wall. Andrea placed the sketch on a small easel next to Keanu's letter. Above it, she hung a single sentence, etched into reclaimed wood. "Every quiet has its voice." Children who visited began asking if they could leave more than letters. One brought a book to donate. Another left behind his favorite weighted blanket. A little girl dropped off her own drawing of Liam's box with the coin and marker, carefully recreated from a photo Andrea had once shared online. Andrea kept everything. She turned a side shelf into a collection spot, labeled simply, "Offerings." It didn't matter what was left. What mattered was that the children felt like they were contributing, not just recipients of comfort, but creators of it. And on the first anniversary of the room's opening, Ethan returned home from college to visit. He stood before the wall for a long time, running his fingers over his brother's photo, then looked at Andrea and whispered, "He built something, Mom." She nodded, her eyes misting. He did. That evening, as the house settled into quiet, Andrea tiptoed into the room. The notes glowed softly in the lamplight. She sat down in front of the wall and read through a new one taped low to the baseboard. It was written in blocky crayon script. "I don't like to talk, but I like being here. It feels like a story that understands me." Andrea placed a hand over the note, then turned to the center. Keanu's letter, Liam's photo, and the sketch all stood together now. A quiet trio that had sparked a chorus. She whispered into the room, more to the air than to anyone present. "Thank you for walking with him." The room didn't answer. It didn't have to. Because here, silence wasn't empty. It was full of echoes. The quiet of the therapy room was familiar, almost sacred. Its walls were pale blue, with soft lighting and sound-absorbing rugs that muffled even the smallest footstep. Liam sat across from Ms. Carley, his speech therapist, just as he had for the last 2 years. She always gave him the same 3 things to begin: a choice board, a squeeze ball, and time. She never rushed, never filled the silence. She knew that for Liam, silence wasn't absence. It was preparation. Andrea sat in the observation room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She'd seen so many sessions, she could almost predict the flow, nonverbal gestures, maybe a vocalization, sometimes a shared smile. But today felt different. Liam was calmer, his movements more deliberate. He'd brought his small wooden box again, the one that held the Wick coin and the printout of Keanu's letter. He placed it carefully beside him like it was a part of the session. Ms. Carley nodded gently. "Do you want to open it?" Liam didn't speak. He just tapped the lid once. Then something happened. As she held up a card with simple words, dog, walk, movie. Liam reached for another one she hadn't picked yet. It read, brother. He tapped it, then with startling clarity he said the word aloud. Brother. Andrea's heart stopped. It wasn't said with fanfare or flourish, just a soft, almost whispered declaration. But it was real. His voice, his choice. Carly didn't react immediately. She gave him space, just nodded slowly. Brother, she repeated with the gentleness of someone cradling a gift. Liam smiled, a small, private smile. In the viewing room, Andrea covered her mouth. Her eyes filled instantly. She remembered the sleepless nights, the fear that Ethan would forever feel overlooked, that Liam would never find the words to bridge the space between them. But now, one word, a name, a bond. Later that afternoon, Ethan walked into the house with his backpack slung over one shoulder and earbuds still dangling around his neck. Andrea met him in the hallway, eyes still red, voice uneven. Liam said something today, she whispered. Ethan paused, his brows drawing together. He did? Andrea nodded. He said, brother. Ethan didn't say anything at first, just stood there in stunned stillness, like the world had slowed down around him. Then he walked into Liam's room, where his little brother sat building towers out of colored blocks. He didn't kneel or say anything profound. He just sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and said quietly, that one was worth the wait. That evening, the house was unusually still. There was no background television, no echo of music from Ethan's room, just the soft clinking of dishes being washed and the occasional shifting of blocks on the living room floor. Ethan stayed near Liam, not hovering but present. He had always loved his brother, even when the silence stretched so long it felt like absence. But something shifted after hearing that one word, not just in Liam, but in Ethan too. Andrea sat in her room, journal open on her lap, pen tapping the page as her thoughts poured out in raw ink. Connection comes slow, but it comes, sometimes not with sentences or gestures or eye contact. Sometimes it arrives in a single word, and sometimes that word is everything. She glanced at the worn photograph on her nightstand. Liam as a toddler sitting beside Ethan, both of them grinning at a sandcastle they'd built together. Back then, Liam still babbled. Back then, the silence hadn't taken hold. But tonight proved something to her. The silence had never taken everything. It had only been waiting. In the living room, Liam had started organizing his block structures by color, carefully aligning blue, red, and yellow stacks. Ethan watched without interrupting, then picked up a red block and quietly added it to Liam's pattern. Liam looked at it, then at Ethan. And this time, he didn't speak. He didn't have to. He reached out, took another red block, and handed it to Ethan. Andrea, peeking from the hallway, felt something tighten in her chest. A quiet ache of joy. Later that night, Ethan sat at his desk with his laptop open. He opened his private blog, the one he hadn't posted to in months. The title came quickly. Penworth. He started typing, his fingers hesitant at first, then steady. I've always wondered if I mattered in the story of my brother's life, if he saw me at all. He doesn't say my name. He doesn't call for me. But today, he said the word I wasn't expecting. Brother. He said it, and for the first time I felt more than included. I felt claimed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect. But it was mine. Liam is teaching me something I think even adults forget. Connection doesn't need to be fluent. It just needs to be true. He ended the post with a single sentence. He's always been my brother, but today I became his. When he hit publish, he didn't expect a reaction. He didn't post for likes. He posted to release something that had been waiting to be said for years. And across the hallway, Liam slept soundly, his wooden box resting near the bed, the word brother finally spoken into the world. The next morning, Andrea found Liam sitting on the floor with a crayon in hand. In front of him was a sheet of paper, the kind he usually scribbled on in long, wandering lines. But today, there were only two things on the page: a stick figure with glasses, and underneath it, one word: brother. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat down beside him, letting the tears come slowly, respectfully, quietly. Liam didn't look up, but he slid the paper over to her and gently patted her hand once, his new way of saying, "This matters." Later that day, Andrea scanned the drawing and printed out a copy. She placed it next to Keanu's photo in the reading room. Underneath, she wrote on a sticky note, "Words don't have to be loud to change everything." When Ethan came home from school and saw it, he froze in the doorway. His backpack slipped off one shoulder as he stepped into the room, eyes fixed on the image. Liam glanced up from his blocks, saw Ethan staring, and did something he hadn't done before. He scooted over and made room next to him. Ethan dropped to the floor, speechless, and started stacking blocks alongside his brother. No instructions were needed, no guidance, just presence. They sat together for over an hour, building a small fortress of red and blue bricks. Andrea watched from the kitchen, her hands still wet from rinsing dishes, and felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. In the days that followed, Liam began repeating the word brother once or twice a day, not always in context, not always directed, but always with purpose. And each time, Ethan responded. Not with words, but with a smile, a touch on the shoulder, a shared activity. Word by word, gesture by gesture, the space between them began to close. The therapist, upon hearing the update, called it emergent social language. But to Andrea, it wasn't a diagnosis. It wasn't progress on a chart. It was a miracle. She sent a letter, not through agents, not through teams, just a quiet thank you in the mail. It read, "Dear Keanu, you helped my son find a way to say the one thing he never could, and in doing so, you helped my other son feel chosen. You weren't just seen, you helped us be seen too, with more gratitude than we can express. Andrea, Ethan, and Liam." The letter wasn't posted online, it wasn't framed, but one day, months later, a package arrived, addressed to the brothers. Inside, a black box, 2 toy dogs, and a small card with just 4 handwritten words. "Keep walking, together, all." It was a gray morning in early March when Andrea opened the mailbox and found a single envelope inside. No postage, no return address, just her name written in neat handwriting across the front. She turned it over slowly, puzzled. The texture of the paper was thick, almost handmade. For a moment she thought it might be from one of the local families who visited Liam's reading room. People often left notes, drawings, and little thank you messages after visiting. She stepped inside, removed her coat, and called out gently, "Liam, you got something?" He didn't answer. He was in his usual spot by the window, the toy dog in his lap, the Wick coin and marker lined up perfectly on the windowsill. The signed letter and sketch Keanu had sent earlier were already framed and hung above his desk. Andrea sat beside him on the couch, carefully opened the envelope, and slid out what was inside. It was a sketch, a hand-drawn illustration of John Wick and a young boy walking side by side, silhouetted under a street lamp. They weren't fighting. They weren't running. They were simply walking together. Postures calm, heads level, one step at a time. At the bottom of the page, a handwritten note in simple block letters read, "Keep walking your way, Liam. I'll walk with you. Keanu." Andrea's hand flew to her mouth. She didn't cry, not immediately. She just stared. The drawing wasn't a print. It was an original. The shading had been done with charcoal pencil, and the edges of the page had the slightest smudge where someone's fingertips had brushed while blending shadow into shape. It was real, intimate, quiet, the kind of gift that required time and thought, not just money. She looked over to Liam, not expecting a reaction, but hoping anyway. Slowly, he turned his head. His eyes moved from her face to the drawing. She lowered it gently into his hands. He took it carefully, then without a word, stood up, walked to the shelf where the coin and marker sat, and placed the sketch beside them. Not above, not below, beside. Andrea watched him, her heart thudding quietly. He stepped back and looked at the arrangement. 3 items, 3 memories, 1 message. Present. Still not speaking, Liam tapped the shelf once with his fingers, then sat cross-legged on the floor and closed his eyes. Andrea sat down next to him, shoulder to shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't respond with words, but somehow he already had. Later that afternoon, Andrea called Ethan into the room. He had just returned from class, still shrugging off his jacket, when he saw the new drawing resting beside Liam's keepsakes. "Whoa," he said, moving in closer. That's Wick and Liam." Andrea nodded. "It came this morning, no return address, just that." Ethan leaned down, studying the sketch. "It looks like they're walking into light." Then he glanced at his brother, who was still seated on the rug, fingers idly tracing the grain of the wood. "He saw it," Andrea said. "I mean, really saw it. He placed it without hesitation." Ethan knelt beside Liam and, without making a big deal of it, mimicked his pose. The two brothers sat in quiet symmetry. After a moment, Liam leaned just slightly to the side, his shoulder pressing into Ethan's arm. A tiny gesture, but powerful. Ethan smiled and nodded. "Yeah, bud," he whispered. "I'd walk with you too." That night, Andrea lit a single candle in the reading room. She placed it beside the framed photo of Keanu's letter and the new sketch. The flickering glow reflected softly off the glass, and for a moment, the little room felt like something more than just a converted bedroom. It felt like a shrine, not to fame, not to the movies, to connection. The kind of connection that happens when someone meets you exactly where you are. No agenda, no need to change or fix anything, just presence. Andrea wrote a note in her journal before bed. Liam's words are few, but his world is full, and the people who take time to understand it, they don't just visit, they stay. Before turning in, she peeked into Liam's room. He was asleep, the sketch now framed and gently propped on his bookshelf. His toy dog lay curled at his side, and the coin and marker remained in their place, untouched but deeply treasured. Andrea took a deep breath and turned out the light, letting the silence settle in like an old friend. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds of the reading room, spilling across the letter wall. Andrea found herself standing in the doorway again, coffee in hand, just watching. The wall was no longer just a display. It had become a living conversation between Liam and the world. Crayon hearts, stick figure drawings, scribbled names, and printed quotes were tucked in among the framed photo and letter. But now, at the very center, was the sketch. Liam hadn't said a word about it. He hadn't needed to. The way he placed it beside his other treasures, the care in that single motion, was louder than anything he could have spoken. He had received the message. and responded in his own way. Later that week, the mailman asked Andrea if she'd gotten a cool drawing from someone famous. When she smiled but didn't answer, he nodded with respect. "Didn't think you would. Some things are just for the heart, not headlines." Andrea thought about that sentence all day. When Friday came, Liam's speech therapist noticed something different. During their session, he pointed to the sketch framed on the shelf and then softly repeated the word, "Wa." It was the second time he had used that word, and this time it wasn't an echo, it was an offering. The therapist smiled and gently tapped her notepad. "You want to walk?" she asked. Liam gave a single nod. Outside, under a sky just beginning to bloom into sunset, Andrea and Liam stepped onto the sidewalk. She didn't say anything, just walked at his pace, matching the rhythm he set. A quiet stroll, no agenda. Halfway down the block, Liam reached out and gently took her hand. No pull, no urgency. Just presence. She blinked hard, eyes wet, and whispered, "I'm right here." At that moment, from across the street, their neighbor waved. Her young daughter, who had spent time in the reading room, called out, "Hey, Liam, I drew something too." Liam turned, lifted one hand slightly, and gave the smallest wave back. It was barely emotion, but to Andrea it was everything. When they returned home, Liam walked directly to the shelf. He touched the edge of the frame gently, then patted the wooden box one more time. His eyes were calm, steady, full. Andrea didn't need a word to know what it meant. He had heard the message, and he had chosen to answer, not with sentences, but with something much deeper, with presence, with hope, with a walk all his own. The road out of Portland curved west like it always had, but this time the silence inside the car didn't feel heavy. It felt open. Andrea kept one hand on the wheel, her eyes flicking occasionally to the rearview mirror where Liam sat, sketch in his lap. Ethan rode shotgun, his legs stretched out and earbuds dangling but unused. He didn't need music today. The hum of the tires and the sun through the windshield were enough. It was their first trip as a family in more than a year. No hospital stops, no therapy appointments, no agendas, just one long road winding toward the Oregon coast, and the ocean waiting like an old friend. Andrea had worried about the logistics, the timing, the emotion, but when Liam had quietly placed his hand on the framed sketch 2 nights ago and whispered, "Walk," then later pointed at the photo of the beach on their fridge, she knew. It wasn't about the destination. It was about the journey, about moving forward, together. In the back seat, Liam sat upright, the sketch balanced carefully in his lap. His fingers traced the pencil lines of the drawing, the one of him walking beside John Wick. A world that had once seemed far and unreachable now tucked close against his chest. Ethan leaned his head against the window and glanced back once. "He's been holding that thing for 2 hours," he murmured. "Hasn't looked up once." Andrea smiled. "It matters, that picture, that moment. It's his way of bringing something solid with him, something he understands." The highway began to open into wide stretches of forest, tall pines lining the road like watchful sentries. Ethan rolled down his window a bit and let the air in. It was clean, cool, carrying the scent of salt even before they reached the water. They passed a small road sign that read, "Seabrook Bay, 15 miles. Andrea felt her breath catch a little, not from nerves this time, but from the feeling that something sacred was waiting for them there. Liam's eyes remained fixed on the sketch. At one point, he adjusted the seatbelt gently over it, as if protecting it from the curves in the road. Andrea reached over and gave Ethan's hand a quiet squeeze. He squeezed back without a word. No one spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The car was filled with something quieter than conversation and louder than noise. It was filled with presence, with memory, with a shared hope that had taken root between the cracks of a very long year. And with every mile, they got closer to something none of them could name yet, but all of them could feel. They arrived just before sunset. The horizon stretched wide like a canvas painted in slow motion, colors melting from soft gold into pale lavender. Andrea parked near a quiet overlook above the cliffs, the kind of place tourists didn't usually find. It had always been her secret spot. Now, it was theirs. Liam didn't need prompting. He opened the door, stepped out, and stood for a long moment, sketch still in hand, facing the sea. Andrea and Ethan stayed back, letting him take it in alone. He walked to the edge of the small bluff and sat cross-legged on a weathered log, the wind tugging gently at his hair. Andrea watched him from the car with a hand pressed to her chest. "He's never done that before," she whispered. Ethan didn't ask what she meant. He knew. Liam had always needed routine, predictability. But this was different. This was choice, agency, movement. After a few minutes, they joined him. Ethan sat on the grass beside his brother, stretching his legs out with a little grunt. Andrea crouched down beside them, careful not to speak too quickly. The moment was too fragile, too perfect. The sketch lay on Liam's knees, fluttering slightly in the wind. He placed a flat hand over it to hold it down. Then, without looking away from the ocean, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the gold marker Keanu had given him. He set it beside the sketch. Then the coin. Then his toy dog. One by one, he arranged them like tokens of a ceremony only he understood. Andrea's eyes brimmed. She stayed silent, letting him lead. Liam tilted his head toward the water. A seal popped up in the surf below, bobbing like punctuation in a sentence no one had spoken. He didn't point. He didn't need to. Ethan watched his brother with quiet awe. "He's making an altar," he said softly. "Like a tribute." Andrea nodded. "To what?" Ethan shrugged. "Maybe to peace." They stayed there as the sun dipped lower, bathing the sky in streaks of tangerine and dusty violet. Andrea finally sat down on the sand, knees pulled up to her chest. She looked over at her sons and saw something she hadn't seen in years. Stillness. Not the stillness of shutdown or silence, but the kind that comes when a body is exactly where it needs to be. A flock of gulls rose in the distance, spinning like breath into the sky. Liam shifted on the log. He pressed a finger to the drawing, then tapped his chest once. Andrea's throat caught. "Do you want to say something, honey?" He didn't answer. But then, he didn't have to. He raised his hand and pointed at the horizon, at the sea, at everything that stretched forward, and said softly, clearly, "Do." Andrea didn't respond with words. She simply placed her hand gently over Liam's. He didn't pull away. In fact, he leaned slightly toward her shoulder, resting his head there for just a second. One of those rare moments of closeness she used to dream of when the nights were long and uncertain. Ethan took a photo, just one, not for social media, not for sharing, just to remember. They stayed on the cliff until the sun disappeared completely. The temperature dropped slightly, but none of them moved. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, rich. The kind that makes you realize how much noise we carry inside ourselves without even knowing it. On the drive back, Liam kept the sketch on his lap again, gently tracing the outline of the boy and the man walking side by side. He didn't speak again, but he didn't have to. When they arrived home, Andrea tucked him in, the sketch now framed and propped beside his bed. She watched him settle under the blankets, eyes heavy, hands relaxed. Before turning off the light, she whispered, "You are so loved, Liam, and you are never walking alone." From the hallway, Ethan watched, arms crossed. He didn't say it out loud, but he felt it too. How something had shifted permanently in their family. Not because of one man, but because someone had stopped long enough to see. Someone had paused the world, stepped into theirs, and said without needing to say it, "I'm with you." And sometimes, that's all it takes. Just presence. Just walking beside someone until they find their voice. The next morning, chalk drawings appeared on the sidewalk outside their home. Ethan had left them. One read, "Keep walking, Liam." Another, heroes don't always wear capes. And in big block letters, good. Andrea stood at the window, coffee in hand, heart full. Not everything had been fixed. Life still came with its hard days. But today, this day, was a sunrise she wouldn't forget. As the wind rustled the leaves outside, she whispered, almost to herself, almost to the universe, "Yes, it really is." Keanu sat quietly on the wooden steps of his porch, a mug of tea in one hand and an envelope in the other. The sky above him was soft with morning light. Gentle clouds drifted overhead, pale and slow-moving, as if even the wind didn't want to rush today. The envelope was already opened, its flap curled slightly from being handled too many times. Inside was a simple thank you card, handwritten in neat block letters, by someone who had once said he didn't care about celebrities. It was from Ethan. The front of the card was blank, no images, no slogans, just one word on the inside: thanks. Underneath that, a short message: not for the moment you gave us, but for who you were in it. Keanu read it again, as if the words might shift or expand with time. They didn't. But they didn't need to. The weight was already there. A weight that felt like warmth. He didn't need to reply. He just breathed it in. A breeze brushed across the porch. The leaves rustled softly in the background. No city noise, no buzz of incoming texts, no questions. Just this moment. On the small table beside him was a wooden box, the kind people keep not for value but for meaning. Inside were a few select things: a photo, a letter, the replica marker and coin, and tucked gently beside them, a folded sketch of John Wick and Liam walking side by side. Keanu ran his hand over the sketch. He didn't need to look at it long. He already knew every line. In his memory, the day was still fresh. The sensory room, Liam's eyes, the weight of silence that didn't feel like absence, but presence. And one word: Wick. He didn't tell many people about it. It wasn't a story to perform, it was a truth to hold. He leaned back, eyes half closed, face relaxed. A voice might have narrated it in another world. Some stories don't need noise. Some bonds don't need words. Just stillness, just showing up. He picked up his mug again. It had gone cold, but he didn't care. He wasn't drinking it for warmth. Down near his feet, resting against the wooden leg of the porch table, was a small toy dog. Soft, worn, one ear bent slightly forward like it was listening. Liam's dog. Keanu had kept it, with permission, after Liam gifted him a newer one. Next to it, the box remained open, and the marker gleamed quietly in the morning sun. If you were passing by, you might not have noticed any of this. You might have just seen a man sitting with his tea looking calm. But if you stayed long enough, if you watched the way his fingers moved gently over the paper, if you saw the look in his eyes, then you'd understand. This was someone who didn't show love through volume. He showed it through presence, through listening, through staying when others left. That's why the family never forgot him. That's why Liam, in his own language of gestures and silence, kept him close. That's why a whole community of parents began to whisper each other's names, share each other's stories, and leave little drawings on the wall of a reading room that had once been a quiet boy's bedroom. It wasn't because of fame. It was because someone cared enough not to rush the moment. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the world needs more of. Not saviors, not noise, but people who walk beside others, even when there's no clear path. So now, before this story fades into the end credits, we want to ask you something. If this story moves you, share it. Not for clicks, not for likes, but for the people still waiting to be seen. The ones who may not speak with words, but who live whole stories inside them. And if you've ever known someone whose silence spoke louder than words, tell us below. You never know who might read it and feel a little less alone. And lastly, if you have an idea for our next Keanu Reeves story, we're listening. Drop it in the comments. That's how this one began. With one voice, one moment, one boy who walked differently, and someone who chose to walk beside him. Fade out. A child draws a heart on the sidewalk. The fox statue from another story rests beside a step. The marker gleams. The box stays open. And the story? It keeps walking.